Hello, welcome. We're from the Outdoor Recreation Center here at WSU, and today we're going to be talking about ultralight backpacking. So my name is Alita Melsa. I've been at the ORC for 3 years now, and I'm excited to share with you.
I'm Liz Wells. I've been at the ORC for just under a year now.
Alrighty, so let's start out by talking about what is ultralight. Maybe some of you have been backpacking before, and maybe some of you have even weighed your backpack before you add things like your food and water. And I'm guessing none of you came up with something like 10 pounds. This isn't a real, like, this is ultralight, this is light, this is traditional. They're more just general benchmarks when people talk about light and ultralight. So next time you get out, maybe it would be a good idea to go ahead and weigh your pack and see where you fall. But goal is lighter so that you can go farther.
So there are some pros and cons to going ultralight. Some pros are that, like Alita said, you can go further, you don't get tired as easily, and it just kind of simplifies the entire experience. But some cons are that you cut some comfort, and it also can be a little bit more costly to buy ultralight gear.
Cool. So we came up with a list of do's and don'ts. So let's talk about the do's first. It's developing that less is more mentality, realizing that each thing that you take off of your backpack is an extra little bit that you can go further. So just developing that mentality can take some time, but once you get out and you have the feeling of walking around with what feels like a hiking backpack, and then all of a sudden you can go for a while, it feels good. So yeah, weighing your backpack before each trip can help you realize what things you're using, what things you're not using, where your weight is, where you could reduce it even further. Building the skill set, more skills, less gear. If you can set up a tarp shelter and you're fairly good on how to do that, then all of a sudden you don't need a tent anymore. And if, let's say, you want to hang your backpack and do that for bear storage, you don't need a bear can anymore, and your backpack just got a lot lighter. And then finally, with food, as you're trying to put that into smaller containers, you don't want to take the whole box that your macaroni came in, so you put it in a plastic bag, and all of a sudden you don't have the weight of the box.
One thing you can also do is you can make a trip log when you go out and you're like, I don't know, like, I'm bringing a lot of stuff, and you can make a list of things that you use and you don't use, so that you can find a pattern like, oh, I never use this, I don't have to bring it, and there you go, you'll lose some weight from your pack. Some don'ts are definitely don't eliminate your key essentials, like your maps, your compass, your first aid kit, clothes, food, safety equipment. You never want to leave those. And don't also sacrifice your enjoyment for the entire trip just because you're like, oh, I want to go ultralight. It doesn't matter if you're going ultralight if you're just like completely miserable. It's not a fun time.
For sure. And it's when you're looking at these key essentials too, it's definitely good to think about, what am I actually going to use? I know when I took the wilderness first aid course here at WSU, somebody asked, what's the best first aid kit that I should take? And the instructor's like, the first aid kit that you would carry. So in my first aid kit, I have ibuprofen, athletic tape, a couple of Band-Aids, and I think I put some latex gloves in there. But it's things I think I might actually use rather than a gigantic first aid kit. But it's good to just take a look at that and think about what you need and still make sure that you have everything you need to stay safe. Oh yeah, so here's an image of what not to do. You may have heard the quote, don't pack your fears. You don't need to pack everything you think you might need. Instead, you want to pack what you think you'll actually need. And this is where the equipment use log that Liz mentioned comes in, so that you can think about, well, you're weighing hiking versus hanging out at camp. And if your goal is to go a long ways, you're not even spending that much time at camp. So it really doesn't matter how comfortable you are if you're asleep. So it's just good to think about prior to heading out on your trip.
And so now we're just going to talk about a couple of ways where you can cut weight in different parts of your equipment. So for shelters, you want to think about what season it is and what the forecast for your trip is going to be, because that can significantly change what you're going to take. So, if it's going to be, cold, windy, and rainy, you still might want to take a tent. But if it's going to be, 60 degrees at night, clear skies, you might just be like, hey, I'm going to sleep under the stars, or maybe even just, hammock or throw up a tarp. And those are all way lighter than tents. Even like the ultralight tents, like they have, specially made tents that are ultralight, but they're still way less than, those tents. Another thing is a bivy sack, which is basically kind of like a rain cover for your sleeping bag, which can be used in the rain. And so those are kind of nice if you're only going to be out for like a couple days. But again, you want to think about weather, because each of these kind of have their downfall to what kind of weather
And I know cost is sometimes prohibitive. So one of the images we have up there, the tarp, it's actually a piece of T-Beck or Tyvek, however you say it, which can be cheaper, and it's something that's going to be durable, and you can definitely look into that if cost is a limiting factor and you still want to use a tarp. Cool. Yeah, so sleeping system. This is one of the most important things when you're going backpacking. Like the difference between hiking and going backpacking is that you're spending the night. So what are you going to sleep on? So the down versus synthetic insulation, biggest pro of down is that A, it's really warm, and B, it packs down really small and tends to be lighter. Synthetic is heavier, but if it gets wet, then you're better off, and it'll retain a lot of its warmth, whereas down won't. So definitely something to think about, and that's where thinking about the climate that you're going to be in can make a difference. If you think there's a good chance it's going to get wet, then maybe synthetic would be a better choice. Finally, insulation in your clothing or in your sleeping bag. If you have a coat as part of your layering system that, say, has down in it, or is going to be warm, then maybe you can go with a lighter bag. Same with beefing up the sleeping pad versus increasing bag fill. There's a little bit of a trade-off there, and pad is definitely a way that you can cut weight. I have a friend who is really into the whole ultralight backpacking, and he'll use his backpack as a pad, and it works great. Like the inside of the backpack even comes out, and he has his feet on the bottom part, which is the backpack, and then his upper body would just be on the part that came out of the backpack. So you can definitely cut weight that way. And then same with a down quilt. It's going to be a lot lighter than a sleeping bag, especially if there's two people and you're comfortable with each other. You can share that quilt, and all of a sudden you've just cut a lot of weight
in a whole bag.
Exactly. And same with the sleeping pad. Like if it's a pad that it's only you who's going to be using it, you can cut it yourself and then take half a pad, which will be a lot lighter. Did you have anything to add on that?
Oh yeah, just with like the torso length pad, you can cut it to just kind of fit your torso and like lower back, and then you can prop your feet up on your bag as well to kind of insulate your feet.
For sure. Yeah. And also, if you have any questions while we're talking, feel free to chat them in, and we will answer them during the webinar.
Yes.
And it'll be recorded too.
So backpacks are, I guess there's multiple kinds. You can go with like a high-tech, like fancy bag, that's going to do everything you want, or you can go with a more like simplistic one. With more like ultralight bags, they're going to be lighter, but they're also going to be, slightly less comfortable and, probably less padded, and they're going to be frameless, which the one on the backpack on the left, the black one, has that metal bar on the back that's like a frame, and it's going to make it easier to carry heavy loads. However, if you're, going ultralight, that may not be a big concern for you. But backpacks can contribute a lot to your just like overall weight. So, if you have a backpack, I would encourage you just to weigh the backpack and see how much that is like adding to your pack weight. And all, backpacking backpacks have, recommended like volume that they can hold. And you should try and fill it to its capacity without going over, to make the most of like your space. But in like that, I'm not saying take like an 85 liter bag out and fill it to the brim. Like try and go as small as you can while like filling it to where it needs to be. That way, there's no extra space for, you don't think that small like extra part of your bag that's not filled is like doing anything, but it's still adding weight to your pack.
And the picture on the right is a DIY backpack that somebody just made themselves. So for those of you who are feeling a little bit crafty, you can definitely go that route and make it just as customized as you want, and potentially cheaper.
Yeah, definitely.
So for navigation, I know maps can be heavy, especially if you're going a long ways. If you're already going to take your phone and you have a reliable way to charge it, using a map on your phone can work great. You can always use the whole map and compass if you want. Alternatively, if you are going in an area that you know, you may not need a map at all if you know it really well. And then with the tools and knife, that's more if you get lost, make sure you're prepared.
Yeah.
So same with headlamp and lighting. That's really essential if you do end up out after dark in a place that you don't know that well. The Garmin InReach, that's the orange one. That's what we use at the Outdoor Rec Center. And I can't speak for the other ones, but I know that one has an exceptionally long battery life and is a reliable way to have all of the maps for wherever you're going just in one device.
I also know that Garmin makes like a smaller satellite messenger that's about 2/3 the size of that orange Garmin one. And it actually connects to your phone so that you can actually like get service through your phone. So that could also be an option. So it's smaller and it still like does the same thing. And as for like the headlamp, you don't need like and like lighting, you don't need like a super fancy one. Like, you know, I wouldn't say cheap, but like a less expensive headlamp, you know, that does the job is pretty much like all you need. And again, if you're going for long distances, all you're pretty much going to be doing at camp is sleeping. So you may not even need something like a lantern. Cool. Okay, so footwear. So I'm sure if you guys have ever, you know, tried to pick out hiking boots, there's some that are super heavy, like super dense, and some of them that are, you know, a lot lighter. So one way, if you still want to have like a hiking boot, you can go with a lighter weight boot that still kind of does the same thing. And they're, you know, new technology is making like these hiking boots like lighter and lighter. So there definitely are lighter possibilities out there. But you can also do like trail runners and minimalist shoes. So the trail runners would be like the photo on the bottom left. Those are the trail runners, and then the one on the right is minimalist shoes. I would definitely recommend getting ones that are comfortable for you and not like necessarily like paying attention to like if you're like, oh, could do a minimalist shoe, but it's going to hurt your feet, you're going to be miserable out there. And so I go with the lightest weight option that works for your feet. And then also like socks, depending, this is also like, you want to think about like the weather, like if it's going to be hot, maybe you don't need those thick mountaineering socks. And you can go with lighter pairs of socks, and no one says that you need a new pair of socks every day. It's nice, but it's not necessary, you know. So really cutting down, it's like, you know, how many days could I really go without changing my socks? Like, am I gonna die if I don't change my socks? Probably not.
For sure. And one more thing to add on this, a lot of people like hiking boots that have like that higher ankle support when they have a heavy pack. But if you don't have a terribly heavy pack, then it's a lot easier to go to one of those lighter shoes that maybe has less support, but you don't necessarily need it.
And they still pretty much do everything that the high ankled ones do. They just don't have the high ankle.
Cool. So let's talk a little bit about layering. Layering is a great way to have multiple, or to be prepared for multiple types of temperatures with the fewest amount of clothes that you need to take. So just by taking off a couple of layers, all of a sudden you're ready for warmer weather, and then by adding a few more layers on, you've transformed your lighter jacket into a heavier one. So here we have a diagram of how the layering system is supposed to work. You can add more layers or fewer layers, but this is the same idea. The outer layer is for repelling wind and rain. So if it's not windy and it's not rainy and it's not super cold, you won't necessarily need it. The middle layer is where all of the warmth comes from. So that might look like a synthetic or a down puffy jacket, or it could look like a polar fleece, or just something to add some insulation. And then the base layer goes against your skin. And with all of these, it's really important that none of it is cotton, because when cotton gets wet, it will stay cold. But the base layer can be wool or synthetic, like this is synthetic. And that should just remove any of your perspiration and move it to the outside.
While retaining your body heat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
For sure. And it's really important that when you are selecting your clothes, you only have one of each type. As long as, especially if you don't think it's going to get wet, you don't necessarily need to bring pajamas. Like you can, but you don't have to. You don't need to bring a change of clothes. You just wear the same clothes every day. And then you're not carrying clothes, you're wearing them.
I mean, a good alternative is you could bring like new pairs of like underwear and socks versus like an entire new outfit. That way you're at least cutting some weight. For sure. Cool. Okay, so food. So I'm kind of gonna start from the bottom. So Alita was talking about earlier, a bear-proof storage. So a lot of the times when you're in the backcountry, there are bears around, and you want to protect your food. One, so that you have food to eat, and two, so that it doesn't lead bears to you. So in the bottom right hand corner, you can see the picture is somebody pulling their bag into a tree, and normally you would do this with like a box or like a tarp, and you kind of like close it on your food and like hoist it up there. But you can totally do it with your pack as well, which cuts down on bringing in an extra tarp, which doesn't weigh that much, but if you're bringing a little bit of this, a little bit of that, that can really add up. And then I guess I'll go back to the top, kind of jumping around. When you're bringing food, you kind of want to focus on like going like calorie dense. So like bringing things like peanut butter or things that get you the most calories per weight of the food. That takes a little bit of research, but it's totally doable. And if you're really looking to go ultra light, then I'm assuming you're already doing a lot of research. One way you can also cut weight is going instant, like in the morning, like instant oats, instant pasta, stuff like that. And also dehydrating your food at home. That is costly to buy like a dehydrator, but you can also buy like dehydrated meals to go ahead and like take. It does the same thing. A dehydrator is more, I think, of like a long-term investment, but it's also a way to like cut cost on your food, and it kind of does pay for itself ish, because dehydrated meals can be kind of pricey. And then when cooking, you kind of want to think about what you're actually going to use. So maybe you don't need to bring like a fork, a knife, a spoon, a bowl, a plate, a smaller plate, a salad, but you don't need all those things. Like when I go out, I bring it's got a knife on one end, or it's got a spoon on one end, and it's got a fork on the other, and on one of the edges of the fork, it's got a knife. And I'm like, it's not the best knife, but it gets the job done. And I bring a bowl, and like that's it. And then I bring one pot to cook in, and I try to do like one pot meals because it's easier for cleaning, and also it's less weight that I have to carry. Also for like fuel efficiency of your cooking, it's another like piece of gear that you could, you'd have to like invest in. But I mean, there's all kinds of like backcountry stoves. Like you can make one out of aluminum can with a fire starter ball. Like that's a thing, and that's super lightweight. Or you can use something like a jet boil that is like, it's a pot, and it basically screws on to a fuel can, and it boils water really quickly. But that does limit what you are able to cook. That would be kind of limited to like instant food and like dehydrated food. So that's, something to think about. And I guess that kind of brings me to the stove versus fire versus uncooked meals. So stove, kind of already talked about a little bit, but like the fire, when we go into the backcountry, we try to minimize how much we're using fire, because as like an LNT principle, we kind of want to leave the area untouched. And if we're making fires everywhere we go, we're not really leaving it untouched. So keeping that in mind, it would minimize like what you have to carry, because you can just start a fire at every place you go, but it's not necessarily great for reducing our impact, like where we're going. And then like the uncooked meals, like granola bars, stuff that doesn't have to be like cheese, salami, those are great options.
For sure. One example of food and how you can make it your limiting factor, and so the only thing that's preventing how far you can go is how much food you can put in your backpack. I ran into someone in the North Cascades last summer who was going from Canada, and I forget how far he was going. He was going past Stevens Pass, but he had a really, really lightweight setup, and he said, my backpack is only food. like he has such a lightweight setup for his sleeping system and all of that, but the majority of his backpack was food. And he just had a big, gigantic bag of instant rice, another large bag of instant or dehydrated vegetables that he'd gotten off of Amazon. And then every night, because there were fire pits at the backcountry campsite, so it wasn't really going to be an impact on the environment, he would just cook up a tiny bit of that food, and then he would go the next day. And he was able to get really far, and at night he would just hang his backpack that was full of food, and that was all he really needed, and it worked great. So something to think about is that by cutting out something that's canned or something that's not dehydrated, you can go a lot farther.
Yeah, most definitely. Also, if you do want to bring things that are like in cans, or instead of bringing like a whole like pepper, you know, to put in your dinner, you can pre-cut things at home and carry them in like little plastic baggies or reusable bags that are better for the environment. But that's hearsay. But it also cuts down on what you have to bring. And, you know, like I said, that aluminum can, you know, doesn't add a lot, but if you're bringing like 4 or 5 of them, you know, that can add up.
For sure. Cool. So let's talk a little bit about water storage. I know when most of you think backpacking, you think Nalgene, the big, heavy plastic water bottle. And they are heavy. You won't necessarily realize that you're like, oh, it's just a water bottle. It's empty. It can't weigh that much. But then if you compare it to something that's thin plastic, that's maybe flexible, then all of a sudden you realize that it can weigh a lot. So I would recommend having something that's collapsible. The top left, the platypus container, there's lots of brands, not just platypus, that make those. But it's something that can hold a lot of water when you're filtering water, but it can also pack down really small into your backpack, so it's not taking up much space, and it also doesn't weigh very much. In the bottom left, we have the iodine tablets. That's really the lightest water purification system. There's plenty that you can use. There's plenty of lightweight water filters, but these are just tablets, and you just add them to your water, and then you're good to go. One thing I would caution is that iodine is not great to use over the long term. If you don't go backpacking that often and you want to do an ultra light trip or even just a somewhat light trip, they'd be a great option for like a week or a weekend, but not great if you're going to spend your entire summer drinking water that's been filled with iodine.
Yeah. Just like a couple more options that some like hardcore people do is something that's called like a life straw. This is like a mini filter, or and a life straw is basically like a tube. It's about this big and it's got a little mouthpiece on it, and you just basically stick the bottom of it in like a running stream, and you just suck water out of it there whenever you come across the source. So you're cutting down on the water that you actually have to be carrying. And then they also have like similar things for like bladders, so like a Camelback, like it has like a tube and it's got a filter to the mouthpiece, so that could also be an option if like you only want to be like carrying it on your back, which would at least reduce the amount of like torque that's not sitting on the side of your bag. And also there's a thing called Camel Up at like water sources, which is basically like drinking a whole lot at each water source that you go, so that you can cut down on the amount that you're also actually having to carry.
Sure. And I wanted to point out that you can do this when you're just going on a hiking trip. So you want to do the 18-mile trail that's through the enchantments near Leavenworth that you've heard so much about. And it's really long, and for your hiking trip, you don't want to be carrying that much. Just bring a water filter, and then a couple hours into your hike, stop at a stream, drink a bunch, fill up your 1 water bottle, keep going, do it again, and you're not carrying much for your day hike either.
Another option is also a SteriPen. So it's a type of water filter. It's again about this big, and it uses UV light, and you kind of like swirl it around for a while. Some of them like give you like a smiley face when it's like okay to drink, and that's like I guess lighter weight filter option. Like you're like seeing like, oh, like if you want to just fill up 1 water bottle like at the stream, like Alita was saying, and you don't want to carry a whole huge like gravity filter. But those can also be more costly, so that's just like something to keep in mind.
Yeah, a few things that you can do to cut down on your costs, since I know that can be a barrier for some folks. Making your own gear, like we talked about, and just realizing that that the ultralight gear that you are purchasing might not necessarily cost as much. So just keeping that in mind. One thing I do want to point out is that if you're trying to cut down on things that you need, That's also cutting down on the cost. So if you don't need to buy a really expensive water filter, instead you just buy the iodine tablets at Walmart
for like $5.
Yeah, you've saved a bunch of money and it's a lot lighter. And not buying a really expensive mountaineering tent, you just bring a piece of T-Beck or Tyvek that you bought for not very much money, and all of a sudden it's cheaper and lighter.
Like, whoa, what happened?
Yeah. Cool. Anything else you want to add to that?
I guess when you go like ultralight, like when you are sacrificing some like comfort, so like taking one or two things that bring you joy, I guess, in the outdoors, like a book or something, or like a journal or binoculars if you like bird watching. That can be nice to like think about when you're on the trail and you're like, wow, this path sucks. I want to be done. You'd be like, I have a book I can read when I get to camp, and it just kind of it makes it more enjoyable, which is nice.
It's very much a balance, and probably something that you'll talk to your friends about. And just be like, I don't know if we should bring this pad or this pad. So it's a little bit of a game, but the goal is that you get outside and you get to enjoy nature. That's all I've got for you.
Yeah.
So thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.